Hello! Welcome to episode 22 of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. And with that said, let's get going. So first we're going to go over to our good pal Rover. Anyway, as you can imagine, you're very restricted on the train when you first start the very first Animal Crossing game for us American folk. You can't help but wonder to yourself, what else can I see? Good question. Well, as you can see outside the windows, there's not much going on. It's very minimalistic camera trickery to make it look like that there's an outdoors, when in fact you're just looking at a flat texture, angled for your viewing pleasure. And once you get out of the tunnel, there's a couple more bushes moving at high speeds. It's really cool looking. Now, when Rover leaves to help a brother out, he gets on the phone and calls Tom Nook. Now, one thing that you probably could have seen on your own time is that he actually pulls out a cell phone, which was not very popular back then, especially during the N64 days when this game originally came out. And guess what? You never see that cell phone again. And since it's hidden behind a door, you really don't expect there to be all that much to it. But you'd be wrong. If we take the camera over, we can actually see that the developers rendered an inside to the phone as well. And on the display screen, it's just a signal bar. Hey, any City Folk fans out there? No, don't worry guys, I got you covered. So, similarly, City Folk has an opening as well, where you're traveling with Rover to your destination. And this time, it's a bus, driven by Cap'n. Now, the bus itself actually has a lot more to look at. For example, on Cap'n's dashboard, he has a little figurine of himself in a boat. Pretty obvious nod to what he did in the Gamecube version. But if you angle the camera slightly, you can see that there's also a little Cap'n sprite on the back end of the boat as well, which is really odd. Now, there's some other stuff here that you couldn't have seen otherwise as well, like this car radio, but a lot of what you couldn't have seen can't really be explained, like knobs and lights and stuff like that. So you may be saying, hey, she says, what's on the outside of the bus? And I enthusiastically say right back to you, well, I'm glad you asked. And now you might be thinking, oh, it's just tunnel lights, man. Why'd you get my hopes up? To which I say, keep your hopes up, my friend. Keep them way up. Because what we're about to see is way cooler than just tunnel lights. If we move the camera all the way up, we can actually see the villager hovering above all the action. What's cool is that you haven't even picked your face yet, but this is the face you will see every single time. And that is the shirt he wears every single time. We finally made it to the beautiful village of Boundary Break Oria. And before we leave the train, how about we see if there's anything going on with it? And actually there is. Now I know it's not much, but this train actually has its own train number. If you ever wanted to know what it was CC16. It's my personal fan theory that it stands for Choo Choo, 16. We finally made it to the beautiful village of Deja Vu Oria. And this time we're going to be looking inside the bus again. But only because this time when you look inside the bus, the developers actually took the time to re-render the whole interior to be minimalized. A lot of the main visuals are here and present, they're just flat textures instead of multi-polygonal shapes and objects. I was pretty surprised. Now, at the start of every Boundary Break episode, I say new discoveries and new perspectives. And Animal Crossing is definitely one of those games that deserves a different look from another perspective. Because all too often in this series, we have to see whatever the game wants us to see when we step outside. But what if we had an over-the-shoulder view? How would it look then? And honestly, I think that this game would be really cool with an over-the-shoulder view. You know, if they just took the time to render the sky as well. I realized that the dark void for the sky is a little unsettling. Ah, yeah, the town hall in City Folk. It's really cool, actually, because in the background, there are objects that you could never see before. And that is because even when you speak to the person at the front desk, the camera never angles itself all the way to the back of the building. But if we do go to the back of the building, oh, there are some things to see. Right off the bat, there's a painting in the background. It kind of looks like Princess Peach's castle, a little bit like the Mushroom Kingdom, but I really couldn't decipher whether or not it was anything related to anybody. And then to the right of that, there's also a medal on display. It's framed, a framed medal, likely given to the mayor for fighting in the Great Crossing Wars. And then over to the right, you can see another bookcase and a calendar. What's on the calendar? Again, I have no idea. It looks like red and black blotches with a little bit of white peeking through some of the edges. I mean, if I had to guess, maybe it's the inside of a human body? White bones? Red blood? I don't know. Meanwhile, back at the Gamecube version of Animal Crossing, pure chaos ensues. Since a cheat code was basically put in to allow the villager to walk anywhere he wants, naturally, we gotta take him to all the areas like the cliff walls and the fenced off areas. Now I still zoomed the camera up because we should probably see as much as we can see, right? And naturally the first thing that we have to check out is what happens if we go all the way to the end of the river. Well, when we do that, we find out that the river actually bends, even though the player would never ever see that, and then it ends. Now let's look once more, just around the riverbed. And there's no sneaky hidden triangles this time, it just ends. And all you get is the void. In the City Folk version of Animal Crossing, Katrina went from just basically being a fortune teller to being an illegal malpractice. What do I mean? Well, when you ask for a fortune from Katrina, an object falls from her ceiling, lands on your head, and then disappears. Now what's really interesting is that when the object disappears, it gets warped just outside the building into the void. Now I'm used to seeing objects being stored so that they can be placed somewhere later. Not often do I ever see an object just appear out of nowhere and then get warped somewhere for no reason. Now if you've been really sharp and have a keen eye, you might have noticed that some of the pots have cones that go well below the surface. This is actually the first time that I noticed this, but as I start to dig deeper into City Folk, I've come to find out that a lot of buildings and fences use this trick as well. And if I had to make a serious guess, I'd say that this is used so that if a building is placed slightly incorrectly, it'll still look like it's just connected to the ground. Whereas if the 3D object were to be specifically made to be placed on top of the ground, there might have been a technical error to make it float a little bit. But making the bottom of all these buildings and objects a cone underneath pretty much guarantees that that's never going to happen. No resetting. Now see, a lot of people like to hate on Mr. Resetti, but honestly, I relate to the guy. The reset button was never anything but bad news for me in my childhood. So, you know, it basically never got pressed unless it was either A, by accident, or B, made to intentionally ruin my day. But either one of those options was never good for me. So, anyway, why are we looking at Mr. Resetti today? We're here to see if he has any legs. And in Animal Crossing for the Gamecube, he does not. And in Animal Crossing City Folk, he also does not. Which is actually kind of interesting because in City Folk, he does show his legs at some point. So you'd think that they would just use the same model and just stick him underground, but nope. They actually have a separate model that has no legs from when he's burrowed out of ground. And now we are at the gate for Animal Crossing City Folk. Now, if you can recall correctly, when you visited a friend in Animal Crossing City Folk, the gates would open and your character would run down the path. Well, how much of the path is actually visible? And if we zoom the camera out, we can actually see that there's a square block of space available for this small scene, but they don't offer up very much beyond what you were able to actually see. But what's really cool though is that when you're on the opposite side of the gate, there's actually a black wall separating your vision from the outdoors. So, what's going on with Animal Crossing Gamecube right now? Maybe we should come back to that. Now, I figured I'd round off City Folk by talking about the city. Right off the bat, you can see that there's a funny texture on that building. That's actually the triangular part of the building put on the back end of the building because players would never see it, but it's kind of strange that the developers would even think to put that texture there instead of just copying another regular texture that would make more sense as a rooftop. But that's not what we're really here for. What we're really here for is obviously the saloon window. See how tiny and compact it is? Oh my goodness. Well, I'm glad I was able to answer that question for you. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, what we really want to know is what is beyond the street when you show up at the city. Well, you can come to find out that the street is fully rendered, but beyond that, there's nothing. Well, unless you're talking about the two bridges on top of the street. On each side of the street, there is a bridge with a tunnel, and they look more like walkway bridges than anything designed for a vehicle. And the last thing that we're going to be looking at is for Animal Crossing Gamecube. When setting up your game, you're often introduced to an Animal Crossing character, and the very first one you ever get to see is KK Slider. Now this one might be a little hard to see. I guess it all depends on your monitor settings, but in the upper left hand corner, there's a weird brown rectangle bar. I have no idea what it's for, but technically that brown bar is in frame in the normal game. So while we can move Magic Camera around so that we can see this in full view, technically you could see this one at home. What's up, guys? I got my fishing rod, my fisherman's hat, and my matching villager. So, for no reason. Anyways, thank you, Michael Chin 1994, for making another fantastic intro. If you want to check out the behind-the-scenes footage of Michael Chin making the intro, you can check out the link down below. Also, in that video, you'll hear a Q&A by me. So if you wanted to know some more information about the show and myself, you have now a chance to do it. There was 15 of you last time, and I really appreciate that you guys decided to show up. So, thank you guys. So, the head-to-head this week, it's going to be Wii Sports versus the Back to the Future video game. Most of you guys were recommending Wii Sports. Pat can't contain his smile right now.
It's Wii Sports!
Who doesn't love that?
It's a fun family game who everyone can enjoy.
Versus a family fun movie franchise, Back to the Future. They made a game on the Wii, and I'd be very happy to do an episode on that. So you guys decide which episode you want to do, vote for it, and we'll get started on it after I get back from vacation. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I'm going out of state for a little while. But yeah.
Ooh, lame.
I know.
Hiss.
Yeah. Sometimes you just gotta, you know, kick off your shoes and
go fishing.
Go fishing. Yeah. You know what? I'm ready. I'm basically dressed for vacation. So, yeah. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I really hope that I don't regret thinking to myself like, oh, I should have said that in the outro. That's a great way to end an outro, isn't it? No, it's terrible. I'll see you guys. All right, bye. Don't shoot the villager. It's awesome.